So, Curtis, for those who don't know who you are, would you like to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kurtis Powers. I reside in Brooklyn, New York, and I am a. Funny that you say that, but somebody asked me yesterday what I would describe myself as, and actually, it was our shared friend John Wally.
Yeah,
How you would describe yourself as far as what you do, and I'd like to think of myself in the microcosm that is my life as a connector and hopefully a sharer, inspirer. Could I make
nice.
that any more vague?
Are you a
But that's what
creative?
we have this whole podcast for.
Yeah, we got plenty of time for that, man. Yeah, so I wanted to as well just get a bit of an insight as to how the lockdown's going, and how things have been going over in Brooklyn.
Yeah, well, I think it would be, um, I think that it would be almost unkind to say that everything's good. Just in respect to, for quite some time, New York City was like the epicenter of the coronavirus in this country until other parts of our country thought that somehow or another they were lacking freedom for having to wear masks and things like that. But
Yeah,
fortunately, because of I guess the resilient nature of New Yorkers as a whole, a lot of people got their heads down and did what was best for the greater good. Uh, I'll love to see where we go with this because I've come up with so many just thoughts and ideas around this. One just being that freedom is collective; it's not singular. But with that said, it's been an interesting thing because I'd say like a lot of the things that I read, I definitely believe that you can turn obstacles into opportunities, and I think that it's something that I'm starting to see a lot right now in New York City, and I'm sure a lot of other cities, but I've not left this city in the last 3.5
yeah,
months, so I don't know what's going on. You're starting to see a resilience of people that are saying like, well, this is the way that things were, and not playing on like hashtags of new normal or whatever you want to call it, but really looking for opportunities to say like, this is kind of a world that we'd like to be in, and or or just saying let's just try this and almost making the world that we want to be in, or things like that. So it's both encouraging, but it's been hard. There was definitely for about definitely about 4.5 5 weeks. I'd have to drive my wife to work. She's an essential worker, and as you're driving, you see these big, giant refrigerated vehicles parked to the side of the roads, and they were the refrigerated vehicles that were housing bodies, and so
wow,
it's almost a bit surreal to see, and so without getting political, I had to like kind of stay away from because I realize it's reactionary, but when you hear people that kind of speak to this like hoax mentality. I'm like, yeah, it's the great global hoax that like somehow or another everyone is complicit in this grand hoax. It's real, and I've had friends that have dealt with it. But for me, I've got my head down and looked to see, what things I can be doing, what I can be doing differently, what things I can learn, what things I can also share and teach, like the colleagues and friends and people that I work with, and then also dealing with things like the dip, and I'd say for me, I guess in the last like 2 weeks or so, definitely hit a bit of a dip where you realize you're like, wow, I'm still at home, and
yeah,
we don't know if it's going to change, but you know I've been guilty of quoting this a billion times that I think it was Marcus Aurelius, a famous Stoic, said, you don't control the circumstances, but you can control how you respond. And right now, like, I can't change the fact that this is where we are, but I can control what I put out there. And so, yeah, hopefully doing stuff like this and, things like that. That's how the lockdown's treating us.
yeah. You've got to obviously, being in New York, being in the being in a very heightened area for the coronavirus in general. It means that daily life has changed. I bet it's been crazy in terms of the city itself and the way that this has changed the landscape of that. But it's like every place. We've just got to adapt to this now and try and make the most of it. I know we've had a couple of conversations. It was good to connect recently, and I'm just really glad that we've had. I mean, there's been a lot of negatives, but great opportunity for us to get together and finally do this thing, because this has been 6 to 12 months in the making, and I'm just
Yeah.
pleased that we can finally get this thing out there. So,
Well,
so
indeed.
yeah.
And
Sorry, go on.
you said you said an interesting word about adapting, and I think that is true to an extent, but I think that also for me, I almost look at where we are in the sense that it's not even adapting anymore. It's recreating. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because the great thing is that we've seen the system, we've seen the status quo, we've seen everything that has been the norm for so long completely shattered and destroyed. And we're doing business differently. We're everyone's talking about, like, the biggest thing that I think that a lot of the world's facing is, like, people are, especially big businesses, they're going to think twice about, like, do I really need to be spending 60 grand a month to house a bunch of creatives, or to do these things that we could be investing our money in different places, and
yeah,
having people be in different places. And if I'm honest with you, as I'm starting to see, I think, even what's happening here, and I do want to preface this real fast, that I am incredibly fortunate. Where we live in a state of, for what it's worth, privilege, and we can go down that hole if you want to at a certain point. But where I live is it's definitely affluent,
mm,
and I would say a lot of the community, they're fortunate. A lot of these people work from home, or if they've been made redundant, then they're at home. But we're not necessarily on the subways, and so we kind of live in this kind of bubble, if you will, and and so therefore, it's not affecting me as great as it is others. But we've certainly seen it, and but on the plus side, I feel like any reminder that there's room for change is right now. Let's just do
yeah,
it.
yeah. No, and like I said, I'm just pleased that we can connect and do this, because I met you. I can't remember what year it was. It was definitely a few years ago.
Yeah.
We were nearly colleagues, and we got to the point where there's just a shared respect, a shared appreciation. You're way cooler than I'll ever be, but I'll try my
Stop.
best, my Fred Perry Colo. But yeah, I wanted to talk about you and what your journey's been like in your career, and because we connected, but you were far down the journey in terms of some of the businesses that you've worked with and some of the things that you've done are amazing. So, do you want to just give a quick intro as to kind of what your path's been like in your career?
I'm guessing that by now your listeners have already figured out that there's no quick. It's certain. I'll
Give me
quickly.
the
I'll
short
just say
version.
this. Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, my journey's been quite interesting. Is that early in my life, I was making music. I was in bands, putting out records, touring, and things like that, and had a job that enabled me to leave and go on a month-long tour when I needed to, and things like that. And around the time that I was getting, I met my wife and got married and things like that. The touring, we're like, well, we're not making, it's not like we're getting rich off this or anything like that. And so mentally, well, I can't even say mentally settling down, but like, I should say physically settling down, in the sense that, like, I didn't need to be on the road with a bunch of guys in a van for
Yeah,
months at a time. And at a certain point, doing what I was doing, no one, when I tell people this, when you look at me or whatever, you wouldn't think I was working in finance. Hey, who knew?
really.
Worked at a bank. Yeah, worked at a bank, doing some smaller investments, mortgages, banking, et cetera, et cetera. And at a certain point, I was there's just no love in that at all.
Yeah,
And my wife said, well, we saved money, you should go back to school, and da 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 da. And fast forward, the one thing that I was good at, because I was doing it through the bands and posters and T-shirts and record covers and things like that, was design. So I formally went to school for design, but just kind of I think maybe that's the personality in me that is the Marmite that you either love or you hate. Is I just drive straight through it. I'm just like, all right, let's do this. And so while I was still in school, I was just hustling, and I was like, getting jobs and things like that. I swore at that time that I was going to be like a magazine, like a editorial designer, or
Yeah.
a guy who does record covers and all the really cool stuff that everyone wants to do, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the reality that came to me pretty quickly is that, well, that wasn't going to happen, and that two, you certainly couldn't make money at it. But I think for me, one of the greatest realizations was we tell ourselves that things that we're going to do or we're not going to do, and we create these really interesting boundaries, but then we don't really ever ask ourselves why. And I think the greatest learning lesson out of that was one of the things I said. I was like, I'm never going to work in advertising. They're all bums, and they're just crooks, and things like that, which is still partially true. But for design, or when we go back and say why, you're like, well, my goal is to create things that are visually impactful and connecting, and telling stories and things like that. And so the medium that in my mind I had created this box around, medium is unimportant. It's like, are we in the business to help people? Are we in the business to connect people? Are we in the, et cetera, et cetera? Our format, whether we're a print designer that makes posters or we're digitally only online, defining that purpose, I think comes first. And so eventually found myself working for agencies, fell really, really digital. And interestingly enough, right around 2007, I absolutely loathed the web, hated it. It was noisy. It was messy. It was, maybe if I did acid, it would have been cool. Cause everything was flash, and everything was just, there was no parameters. And even though, kind of coming from like a punk rock background where things are a bit rougher around the edges and your visual, whatever, it was just a mess. And I have ADD and I couldn't concentrate. So you just don't want to be on the web. And so I ended up finding my path into this, and slowly, I'd say fast forward to about maybe 2013, started really, really developing, because of my colleagues and my peers, really, really developing a love for understanding experience, and realizing that even though as a previously visual designer, art director, whatever, there's no such thing as good design that has bad experience, because the second you see good design or something that looks visual and you press that button and it doesn't work, and so for me, that was the absolute bare basic foundational side of it. And then the truth is that for me going forward, if we're going to be making something, it doesn't need to just look good and work. It needs to actually provide something that you're like, oh, that's great. That helped me. Or else it's kind of like somebody doing a cover of a Led Zeppelin song that sounds exactly the same, but actually not really as good as you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to do it, you need to do it, and you need to find your way that you're going to make it different and a better experience, and things like that. And for me, I was kind of championing this thing, and where I looked at there's not an autonomy between separating brand and experience. And so many ways that we were doing things in agencies, where you had your brand team and then you had your digital team. And I said, there's that massive disconnect. Like, we are the same. We're saying, like, and again, it's going back to that, the locking of the boundaries of what we do. We don't do this. We don't do this. This thing is, we're solving a problem. It's not this separation. I think that maybe for some, in just the organizational sense, you have to have it separated into things on spreadsheets or
best
whatever.
The best teams, though, yeah, and you're absolutely right in terms of what you say in the differential and the blurring of design and traditional creative as it once was, back in the day, versus where we're at today. But also, I think brand and experience. I think brand is. It's always been massively important, but I think that every single person in every department should be part of the brand team, because you're essentially, you're creating, like you said, experiences. You need to know the personas, you need to know the target audience, you need to know, the core values of the content that you're creating. If you're in the content team, it's kind of, it needs to, I understand, you're right. A lot of businesses cut things up and put them into boxes or put them into teams or whatever. The best teams I find have a little flavor of each, and then they work together as a collective unit, with specialist teams, rather
Yeah.
than trying to go, it's that department, or, oh, let's send it to the UX guys and they'll deal with it, but they don't need to know about brand or content or whatever,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I mean, to me, like when we used to walk into brick and mortar stores, like your brand experience that is your brand. The experience that people, because we know that humans, and so this is actually, I'd say the furthering of where I went is that, starting to kind of delve deeper into understanding the irrational nature and of humans. Like, we make decisions based on feelings, you know what I mean? And experiences. And so our brand view, like our worldview, if I've walked into a store or I've gone to your website or I've used this app and it's been a horrible experience for me, that is now what your brand means to me.
Yeah,
And you know what I mean? And so,
feeling.
and it's a really interesting thing. And it's the reason that like everything we do needs to be intentional and everything needs to be kind of qualified as in its importance, because the simplest little thing, and obviously we're separating that idea between the people that are just having a bad day, and write a bad Yelp review or whatever. And you can see that. But the smallest things, can really, really make a big difference.
Yeah.
So
you're progressing,
but yeah,
obviously. Sorry, I'm sorry to jump in. You were basically progressing, and you have progressed, and you've worked for literally some of the biggest agencies in the world, from an experiential perspective and coming up with those experiences. Now, obviously, we're going to touch on it a little bit in a sec about, big agencies versus small startups. But just talk me through kind of some of those bigger agencies and what your kind of feeling was during that period of time, and then how you've progressed since then as well.
Well, let's think about that for a moment. It's an interesting one, because for me, I feel like I've been incredibly fortunate because, again, I didn't have by the time I accidentally began working for JWT, and I mean this accidentally, I wasn't even, because advertising and marketing agencies, they weren't on my radar. I didn't even know who they were or what they did or anything, and right around, I think it was 2009. It was funny enough, I can still remember the recruiter's name, who sent me to meet with what is now JWT. At that time, for like the first 2 months, it was a smaller part of JWT called RMG, and they were like, "Oh yeah, they're not an advertising agency," and you're like, "Okay, cool, all right, yeah, I'll go meet with them then." And but I will say that
Madison Avenue.
they're on. Is it Lexington? I believe it's on Lexington Avenue. But yeah, I mean, up there in
where all the advertising agencies are. But okay.
no big deal. But in the meantime, I will say this: the first time you walk into one of these places, I mean, you're kind of, in New York City, you're overwhelmed, and you're like, wow. Like it really is spectacular and overwhelming, that you're just like, wow, there's so much happening right now, and the buzz that you feel when you walk in, and there's cool furniture, and there's like, ping pong tables, and loads of crap that you don't really need, but for the sales perspective, it really works. It's like walking into a car dealership or something like that. You're like, yeah, I'll have it all. But
you remember you remember the pink floor in our agency that we used to have?
Yeah.
People like, no shit. People used to come back for the rhino and for the pink floor. Like, oh, you've got a rhino in your office? That's so cool. And now you've got a pink floor. Yeah, That's,
I mean,
it's the fizzle almost of what people try and, it's almost like a subliminal sales tool that you actually just create
yeah.
this facade
I
of
mean,
tacky stuff,
I mean, you thought it was our relationship, but I was just there for the pink rhino. I was trying to move to Manchester just for the
Yeah.
pink rhino. But I guess to the more serious point is, I'm fortunate because I got in and I worked with some of the most like brilliant people. Caveating that, you definitely through those years you saw people that you knew then were dodgy and so on and so forth. So but taking it through, I mean, you work on some of the toughest things, and I should say, like as a junior, person at that time, you absorb that and you learn a lot, and it's a really great thing because you're around so many different minds that I really do feel like when you don't necessarily know where your direction is, you can really see people that you want to, that you're inspired to be like, and try to take on that posture. And I worked with some of the, most fabulous people that I can think of. That doesn't even make sense. The most fabulous. Yeah. I worked with some amazing people, and
Yeah, there's
and
there's a
I'm
lot of
incredibly
role models in
thankful.
the bigger agencies, isn't there? In terms of you can always look up to those people and you can learn a lot from the senior level, because
Yeah.
different people in different in different roles bring different things to the table that you think, right, okay, I'll take a bit of that, a bit of that. And
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you get that inspiration with great people, that's always something that I've always found is a benefit to working in bigger agencies, where you draw from the collective kind of pool of
Yeah.
talent.
But at the same time, I think like kind of fast forwarding, once you've gone through enough enough years of it, and I mean, I remember a point in time in around 2014 that I remember there was for a good period of almost a month, but this was actually a huge turning point in my career. Is that there were days that we were there from like 9 a.m. until about 3 a.m. You know what I mean? Like, and just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
sleeping in the bean bags in the corner, like kind of taking shifts. And, you start to realize that the agency really, is the name, right? It's the reputation that brings the people that are indoors together for that special collaboration. And that with those doors also, they at a lot of times I started to see, that the minds that were inside of it were bigger than, unfortunately, they were bigger than the walls that kept us in there, and they became boundaries. And so, I began, and maybe I think this is probably just down to the question everything entrepreneurial nature of who I am. But then I started seeing incredible inefficiencies. I saw where, in so many more cases, that the bottom line was more important than us really adding value. It was we needed this client to keep the lights on, and um, yeah. And so I learned some really hard lessons, that led me to really, really question what it was that I was doing there anymore. And what were we, just some sort of, I don't know, service provider, the order taker, or were we looked at as the experts that we were sold as? And unfortunately, I started seeing more of that, than I saw, of the latter. And so, yeah, and so fast forward, then I started looking at, how do I either get involved in a smaller agency where I can make a bigger impact, and try to work with, again, those same types of people that we would work with in big agencies, but those ideas people that suddenly we weren't, pairing, pulling back the pitch so much that once the client says, "Oh, we love that idea, but we need to pare that back," and then you spend 6 or 8 months doing, like,
A
not
sanitized
really
version
doing
of it.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and then that's when I think eventually I met, your previous company, and the previous company before that, which was
Yeah.
Photolink and things like
Yeah.
that, and then just began kind of getting on a path of looking at how do we just do it as consulting, because I felt like I could offer a lot more value to clients. And I don't just mean freelance. In some cases, it was a matter of going in and talking and listening and understanding where their issues were, and almost kind of coming up with a strategy that they felt like they were a part of, as opposed to the client agency relationship that we had before, where pretty much everyone was like, the client's an idiot. And, and that's a terrible, terrible posture to have within that.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that. That's one of my biggest things that obviously, I've worked in a couple of agencies, and I'm not saying that everyone was like this in the teams, but you did the odd person in the teams where they're just like, the client's such an idiot. Why don't they get it? Why don't they understand it? Especially when you're in digital and, you've got either developers or marketers who get above the station and get a bit arrogant and like they look down the nose at people and whatever else. And it's just a little bit like, well, you're the idiot for not explaining things correctly because they don't fucking understand what you're saying, man. So just, you know what I mean? Like, what? Just explain.
You are so on the money with that, because, and it's something actually I've been looking at, and I'm so glad you kind of teed over to that, because, the truth is that we are, like, as humans, we're illogical, we're pattern seekers, right? And so, but we look for things that are comfortable to us. But we're in this place now where I don't mean we, because I don't think that, I try to avoid that. And actually I try to speak against that. But many people in this world now have gotten to this place where they're not getting the enrollment anymore. They're not getting enrollment. And so when the person doesn't understand, somehow or another, it's the person's fault. But if our job, especially within the marketing space, or let's just call it the communication space, or whatever, we need to actually think, okay, could it be that we're just not explaining it? Are we just not showing that person the value of what we're saying? You know what I mean? Are we not speaking? We're speaking at them. We're not speaking to them or with them.
I'm actually a little bit more cynical with agencies. With some agencies that I've had the experience with, not my previous agency, but people who I've known in agencies and in the space that you and me are quite familiar with, on both sides of the pond. But I genuinely think that people make a conscious. I don't think it's an accidental non-enrollment conversation. I think people genuinely don't want to tell the client what the step-by-step process is. They don't want to bring them into the conversation. They don't want them to understand everything, because they know that actually they've learned what they do by going on YouTube and going through tutorials and experience. So they're actually doing it on purpose, because they don't want to give the client the first two steps, because they're on step 4 and they know a little bit more so they can get by. And if the client actually figures it out, they'll realize that they can do a lot of that stuff themselves. And wait a minute, why am I charging agency A? Why are they charging me $5,000 a month and agency B is charging me $10,000 a month? Why am I paying for this when actually I can upskill myself, or even better, bring in an in-house? It's that, I think it's the paranoia. The best agencies, though, and the best people who work in teams with clients, it doesn't matter if you're a consultant or an agency, they spend the time educating the client so he's talking the same language, rather than complaining that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about 6 months down the line when they cancel the contract. That for me is that it's a bit of a hypocrisy of we're the experts. Well, share your knowledge then if you're an expert.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If you're confident enough in the value that you bring, then you should be able to share without fear of losing. You know what I mean? And if anything, I think the more that we share, and I it's great that you're actually kind of going into that sharing, because I think that the one thing I think that coronavirus has done globally has been to kind of create this. I feel like we're in this knowledge share economy right now, that people, we've got this time, and I always draw this analogy, which is funny because maybe I'll mention that later, that, we started a small consultancy called Analogy about 2 years ago, but I love talking in analogies. And I think we've discussed this before as well. But when you come to New York City and you first move here, the subways, navigating the subways can be so overwhelming, because it's so many people and so many different lines going so many different ways, and things like that. And when you're in the subways during rush hour, people are aggressive and it's hot, and there's like just a million things that make the experience really hard. But there's one really special thing that happens, and I think about it in describing kind of New Yorkers, is that for the most part, there's almost like this badge of honor. It's like once you've especially if you're a transplant that's come here. Once you've figured it out, you love to share it when somebody's like, hey, can you tell me how to get there? Because you know what that felt like. And it almost feels good to be able to say like, oh yeah, do this. And and if we think about that in just the purest form, we're not giving away anything. We're, you know what I mean? Like we're sharing it. And to me, it's this intrinsic thing that then it gives me more value, right? It makes me feel like, because I've then invested in you by sharing with you, that somehow or another I'm richer because that's my value. I'm able to share. And that's really, I think, the difference in what you look at with consultants, and people that say, I really care about this, and this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to talk about, and this is what I share, and that's why the value is so important. And we've spent. It's not that you can't learn it yourself. Anybody could spend enough time to learn any subject. The internet is abundant, and
Yeah.
so there's no knowledge hoarding that's gonna somehow or another make you richer. You know what I mean? If anything, you just need to figure out where to apply it for it to either give value or to be able to monetize it and turn it into something, I don't know, profitable.
I think that's definitely. Yeah, I completely agree that coronavirus kind of pandemic has accelerated the knowledge share, webinars, content that people are putting out, or the real content creators. I feel like the shit content creators have gone into hibernation, and I'm sure they'll come back at some point, maybe next year. But yeah, the people who are really good at what they do share it, and they share the good stuff and they share the challenges. It's never the here's the quick tip, here's the fast track way to get to this. It's actually, if you want to learn about SEO, or if you want to learn about user experience design, you're going to need to learn quite a lot to actually get to the level of a practitioner. However, if you're a client and you just want to pick up the basics, every single agency that works with with any client should be giving them that introduction into. They should be sharing the resources that they go to, and not be scared that the client is, because the thing is, you do actually get that. You do get the client who knows just enough about Google AdWords or Facebook Business Manager to run Facebook ads, and then they go crazy, and then they come back to you 3 months down the line. But I think that like when we had that conversation and my transition from being agency to more consultancy, I would say that is the biggest step change in my approach. That I've always given stuff away for free. I've always given people advice. I've always tried to help people. But I think that whole core belief that I know you share, which is, why does someone have to pay Sapient Nitro or these huge agencies who are just adding another 5% to the profitability? Why do they have to pay those guys massive amounts, and why does everyone need to pay this massive agency premium to get to where they need to in their kind of online or digital journey, or any journey in that respect? So I completely agree that it's been accelerated. Definitely feel like the best agencies, or even like from a consulting angle, it's bringing people along rather than saying, oh, aren't they stupid, or like
Yeah.
it's quite a unproductive kind of childish way of looking at things. But yeah,
Well,
so go on, sorry mate.
I was just gonna say, just to respond to that real quick. I think, and there are two things that can be said about that. Is that in one way, I think about how you feel about just a person that you've met that gave you more than they took from you, right? Like being in someone's presence that just shares and says, oh, like, check this out and blah blah blah. You feel like you're, you feel thankful for being kind of in their presence. And I don't mean that in like some weird, like mythical godly way or anything like that. I mean it in the sense that, like, you're like, wow, man, like I really want to be around this person because I feel smarter, I feel richer for having them around. And I think that, like, being able to kind of pour yourself out like that for people, for clients, like, I want to make two points, and then I'll go on to your next question. Is that for a long time, people always talk about B2B and stuff like that, but like, we are not in a B2B culture. We're in a P2P culture. The people that we're talking to at the clients, they're people, and they are as they are as both intrinsic as we are. They are as emotional and irrational as we are, and we need to think about like, what are we offering these people as people, because they have their aspirations of creating something great within their company and et cetera, et cetera. But I do want to play slightly devil's advocate. I have a mate who works for a massive agency in London, and he oversees a global role for a client that is so massive and global. I mean, just the amount of the sheer volume of work. I'm pretty sure that I think he says he oversees 28 teams across the globe. He has 400 people on this one account. And now I don't know, if you were to really, really look at line by line, how much is just, this person sits there and sends an email every day or what. I'm sure that there is some inefficiencies there that could probably be trimmed, but, I don't want to also pretend as I'm suggesting to everyone like, oh, go out and do your own thing because we all suffer from the thought that we can't do something. I think Seth Godin calls it lizard brain. But like, we all deal with imposter syndrome. And so I want to encourage everyone that you are able, we're all imposters the first time we do something, but you are able to learn what you need to learn and do what you need to do and align yourself with it. But let's not forget that in these cases of don't think that like we can suddenly overnight build a small agency with like 5 of our mates and serve, like these global brands. There are those need for those giant agencies, and there will always be a need for those agencies to help to kind of create that. I feel like that platform for, people to really just get a grasp of it. And, when they've hit that point that they think, you know what, I think I can do this. When you think in your brain that you might have a better idea and that you think you can do it, try it. The worst that can happen is that, hey, it doesn't work out. No harm, no foul, right?
I think it's such an important piece of advice, especially at the moment, because obviously things like the job retention scheme, the economic downturn, etc. There are going to be a lot of talented people, I think, without a job to go back to, and it doesn't matter the sector. I mean, me and you are from a digital creative sector, and you definitely more on the advertising side of things and the creative side of things. There's going to be so many talented people who are not going to have a job to go back to, and you're absolutely right. Those big agencies serve big clients, and you know what? It's the client's fault for paying them all that money and having 400 people globally. There's going to be 200 of them who are maybe not needed, but they're in the quote, and they're in the margin, and they're definitely going to be making decent money on the day rates and all the other boring shit that agencies talk about. But ultimately the client's paying that, so that's all good.
But that's why this isn't
down the pyramid, down the scale. And when you talk about these talented people who are going to now become available, I see opportunity, and I really do see that those SME business owners and those people who have got their own startup business, and then they might be screwed because their own startup. I've got to, you've got to kind of go out to the market and you've got to do these things. Well, actually, I think there's going to be more access to great talent than there ever has been for those SMEs and startups and small client side, brands and businesses, whether it's B2B or B2C. You just need to know how to find the talent, for me.
Well, yeah, flipping that kind of on its head or going with it. I'm not sure which way it is, but so many people, I think, for a long time have just been afraid of failing, and right now, whatever your definition of success and failure are, like we know that they're fairly arbitrary and can be replaced. But now's the time that it's like, okay, well, there's no such thing as job security. There's no such thing as like just kind of, we used to call it phoning it in. Like we used to have people that are like, oh, that guy's just phoning it in. But, you had mentioned like kind of earlier, like content creation. And I think right now is a time that like, every relationship we have with anyone we work with, personal or business, client base, whatever, is I think we're the most important thing that we can do in trying to do our own things now is, you mentioned content creation and that the content creators have kind of gone silent. And the truth is that like, once we've seen what a global pandemic has done to ravage the world, communities, families, cities, states, countries, continents, the world, and we look at things like Black Lives Matter that's happening in America, and even seeing the globe now come around that. I don't think that suddenly the global culture is gonna move to a, we don't like to be entertained and we don't like to have fun. But like, when we think about, to me, what quote unquote content creation has become, it's to me, it's become such as this buzzword that's just like, oh, we'll make something for you that that isn't, I don't know. To me, it's either saying this is advertising, because advertising was coming up with stories and making a commercial about stuff that sometimes didn't even really align with the brand. It just got people's eyes on it. And to me, I feel like we're by all means heading into this kind of, the world has been plagued by a lot of terrible things, both politically, both socially, both economically, et cetera, et cetera. And for businesses to really, really excel, and I think that these are the businesses that you're going to see that are going to really come out on top post-coronavirus. They're not hiring content creators. They're looking at saying, what's our story? Like, why do we exist? And what do we stand for? Because, if you don't anymore, people want to align with something that they believe in. And, especially like, we choose what we wear, what brands we wear on our chests. And, and so, I don't want to be in the content creation business. I want to connect and inspire people to a brand that stands for something. You know what I mean? I want you to feel excited from like we're both wearing Fred Perry. They align somehow or another with this vision that I have of myself and things like that. So it's, I think that we need to be really, really mindful as creatives and marketers that like, it's not about just creating content. You know what I mean? Like to me, that it's just a throwaway term that's like, I'm going to create this 30-second thing for you that in a month no one's going to remember, or just calling it like it is. I'd rather help brands to really build those really, really important things that we look at like infinitely, that you've built this foundation in the brand that changes the way that people and their kids and their grandkids, that are going to, love you forever,
Yeah. The difference between the best brands, is that the content creators in the shit brands are the ones who are creating it for the click. They're creating it for the data.
Yeah.
They're creating it for the ROI report at the end of the month. Whereas the best brands are the ones who are creating it for that long-term kind of emotional attachment, and like you said, it's more building a tribe, a community of people that are loyal to the brand and telling stories that way, rather than getting the click. Because that's one of the frustrating things in the industry as well, is that when you do talk about content creation, this gets more click-throughs. It does, but it's absolutely terrible. It's off-brand. It looks shoddy.
Yeah, and it's
all these other things. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for working with algorithms and with, campaigns to make sure that campaigns are getting the most out of it. But I definitely feel like that surface level kind of content creation is kind of 10 a penny at the moment, and it needs to. And the ones who are winning at the moment, because I'm not saying no one's creating content. I'm saying the people who are creating shit content, the click-through content, they've had their media spend taken away and they ain't doing anything. The people who are actual brands, the brands that are really getting an emotional connection with the consumer and with the clients that they want to bring through, are actually having that deeper level conversation. And for me, that's what wins. That's what's always been the case. It doesn't matter. Like you said before, it was eyes in a newspaper and a catchy headline. Now it's a clickbait headline and a image of whatever. That's just the transition that we've made.
Well, it goes back to that thing I said before that, like, humans are pattern seekers, right? They look for things that they can kind of follow. And so, when we're thinking about, like, in this case, these are short-term patterns. And what we're seeing is that because then we're looking at that, we're looking at these kind of short-term patterns to create analytics that we look at as this metric that we can test. But if they're not long term, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like inflation of of belief in whatever, that somehow or another you're doing something great, or that this person that has like a gazillion Instagram followers, that somehow or another they stand for something that's more important than what they do. And that's why I think that we need to be really just thinking about, intrinsically, like, who these brands are, what they align with, and letting that become the narrative that, like, it can still be fun, but but it has to, I don't know. So
I think it has to
that's
align with those values, and that's the critical bit for me, is the not the continuous cycle of churning out out the sausage factory. It's more, what is the deeper level that we're looking to achieve. And when obviously you've worked in the bigger agency side, and we touched on analogy earlier, and the smaller side of things. So just touching on because it's kind of this conversation came about because of we've had a previous conversation about big agency versus small startups, and big scale production and creation of content across however many countries, 28 countries with 400 people, because there is a requirement for that out there in the market. But that interesting kind of mid to lower tier of your SMEs and your startup businesses. What's your kind of experience since you've been more in the consultancy angle versus the big agency world? What are the differences?
I feel like part of the reason that I even, worked with a few smaller teams was so that I could begin to, as I knew that my goal was to eventually try to create our own business. I knew that there was still more things that I needed to learn. And, obviously, like, being a creative director for, bigger agencies, you're used to seeing burn reports. You're sitting in your staffing meetings, and you're seeing how those sorts of things are going. When you're working on pitches, you're, to an extent, you're seeing scoping and budgeting. But, like, I feel like for me, it was really getting in and learning those things, and actually being a part of, like, how we're scoping the cost for a project. To be honest with you, one of the hardest things is, like, then gaining that confidence, where you then go to a client and you say, yeah, this is going to be $125,000 for this project, and owning it. You know what I mean? Not feeling somehow or another bad or insecure that you've just asked for what seems like in your brain a huge amount of money, but then when you actually line item it, you're like, oh, this is why this costs what it costs. It's like, you don't flinch at looking at the price of a vehicle and being like, well, maybe we don't really need the tires. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, this is the cost. You might be able to negotiate it, but it's not suddenly this thing. And so I think for me, that's what I was really able to. I was able to begin to gain a confidence in understanding our value as a small consultancy, whether it was me partnering with, like, my friends at Dear Future, or other places. But then I also think that, like, there's certain, and this can go both ways in the pros and the cons, is that I was really fortunate, a really massive organization in America. I had done some consulting for a project with them prior, and the relationship was, I couldn't tell if the relationship was actually that good. But when something really big and bad happened on their end, the guy came to me and said, well, I told them if they wanted me to be a part of this, that I needed to bring my guy in. And I was like, I'm your guy now. But it did make me feel really good that clearly I had shown the value that I can offer. And to be honest with you, it made me from this top dude to be able to then be privy and really solve a big problem. That the problem wasn't really on creative or delivery or anything like that. It was really fundamentally in the team that created the project and their overall disconnect in what they did. And so, for me, it's been being able to see, but also being able to be trusted in that space, because there's not a false expectation that like I'm Digitas or whatever. They know that they're coming to you for that purpose, right? Where I think like when you do look at bigger agencies, you know kind of what they do, but you don't necessarily, you might have different expectations than what you're getting into. And but equally, sometimes you can find yourself in a client relationship, and this is, I think, something that you and I had a chat before about, is that the one thing in that being clear, and it's why my first conversations with clients is understanding, why they're coming, why they're, what is their purpose behind this thing that they want to create or they want to do, or the problem that needs to be solved. And part of this came from this really, really great book that I read called The Coaching Habit, which is highly, highly recommended. Because a lot of people, they come to you and they say, here's the problem, and you just accept, oh, this is the problem. Let's try to start solving that. But the question is that like that problem, in a lot of cases, they say it's like an onion. It's like you have to peel back five layers before you can get to actually the root of that problem. And that this thing that we're pinpointing on the surface isn't normally the problem. So when we go to that, we try to start solving for that, then it's, that's why we fail, right? And so I try to make sure that before going into these relationships, that you're not just coming because we're going to be a fraction of the cost of big agency. Now that's a benefit, and we want to provide that benefit for the clients we serve. But we're not here to be cheap. You know what I mean? Like we're here to to be efficient and to and to give you value for a good cost. It's not to be cheap. And and so I think at a certain point, they then, certain clients can look at you as a small agency and think, oh, well, this is going to be cheap, and we can also, demand X, Y, and Z, and those are not relationships that I will ever choose to be involved in. So
yeah,
so that's what I feel like I've learned.
I can relate to that, and I can relate to because since I've been doing some consultancy, I've certainly found that. Whereas I used to be on the agency side, saying, oh no, they brought in a consultant, to now sat on my side of the fence, which is basically trying to just deliver as much value to that person who runs the business as possible. And you get to the stage where you do have to peel back the layers, and actually you spend more time questioning the client than you actually question the agency or the team or whatever it might be. It's actually, no one's actually set that business owner right, and no one's actually said to them, no, all those things that you think are the right thing to do, they're not the right thing to do. This is why, breaking things down to them, because anybody who's a CEO or a marketing director or whoever, they're clearly smart. They're not just idiots. You've got to break things down to them, and often it takes a consultant or a consulting business to go in and to tell them the facts in their language and in a way that they can understand, to then move things forward. Otherwise, you'll keep churning out the same stuff that you've always churned out. Your website will always perform at the same level it's always performed. Your campaigns will always perform at the same level that they performed in the past, because the key decision maker, the person who's supposed to be steering the ship, actually doesn't understand it and doesn't understand every aspect of what they're trying to navigate. So they're
not asking the questions.
No, I know. And the thing is, I think forcing people to do the homework up front and to do the due diligence themselves, so then they're ready to make the right decisions on campaign A, campaign B, option A, option B, whatever the service delivery is. It does, it's irrelevant at this stage. I think that's certainly one of the things that now I've gone into, because I've always consulted businesses and what they should be doing online, in some way, shape, or form. I've given out some great advice and grown some businesses. I've given out some bad advice and I've learned from it. That there are just things that you learn over time. But I think the best thing about this whole consultancy, small, agile, because it's just me, it's literally, you're doing it all off your own back, and you're also helping people make those decisions. But you can tell that you're giving them the honest answer, that the agency that is trying to protect the revenue, the revenue generation, or the retainer, or the project, or the team, when there are less kind of complications to that, you're actually just giving them the straightforward, here it is, this is what you need to do. Let's understand the problem. If you don't understand this problem and you're not taking it seriously, you'll never get to where you need to be. And you can burn through 5 agents all you want, because you're not gonna
yeah. And that's key, kind of going back to what we were saying before, is that like, the best leaders ask questions, right? And I think that we in a lot of cases we find ourselves, kind of back to that insecure thing, is that I shouldn't say we, others they feel like asking questions makes them look weak. But the truth is that, to your point, do you want to be another person that kind of comes up with the same implementation to this problem, doing the same thing, never solving it, and then you're just another list? And it's, again, we're so quick to act without listening and learning, and I think that, and it's a practice that I've been having to do, is, and again, it goes back to that value with sharing, like we said before, sharing with the client, is that when you go in, I would say you can't get any smarter if you're already the smartest guy in the room. And I mean that in a way that by not listening to other people, you're not gonna get any smarter. And here's a clue, is like, you can't be, like, you're not the winner of smart, like going into Simon Sinek's infinite game. This is an infinite game. You can't win smart. And so, you have to value the client that you work with as well, so that you can learn from them what their real problems are. And then again, going back to that relationship, that value comes from the fact that I'm willing to share everything with you, and I'm willing to be humble and ask you questions so that I can learn from you, so that we can put this strategy together and that they feel a part of. And again, I feel like, for me, this is where I feel like myself and my team, we really give value for what we do.
And when you talk, obviously the whole conversation of what we're talking about here is big agencies, in your case, absolutely huge agencies versus smaller startups. If you could pick one to work in, which one would it be?
You said huge agencies, or
would you prefer to work for a bigger agency or a smaller consultancy?
I mean, right now, I don't think that there's so actually, that's a great question. And I want to actually ask you the question. I'm going to flip it back at you. Why would one, from your viewpoint, why would one want to work for a huge agency versus a small? Let's start with that real quick. Flipping it back to you. Has anybody interviewed you on your podcast?
mate, no one asked me questions on this thing, so yes, thank you.
Give it.
I think it depends who the individual is and what they're looking to achieve in their career. A lot of people who I've worked with in the past, it's about the names, it's about the brand names. I've worked with this client, I've worked with that client. I've been to meetings in different countries. I've been, I've had business travel. That's massive in America. With some of the clients that I've worked with over in the States, they value that. They're almost like comparing air miles to say, right, okay, we've traveled the furthest, or we've had the most meetings, or whatever it might be. From an agency standpoint, and then you've also got that, because I think that plays to a lot of people's ego, where and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. When I meet people, I say, look, I've done some work with Adidas, I've worked with this brand, I've worked with that brand. I'm not ashamed to say that. If you go on my website, it's one of the first things that you see. It's because it's proofing the quality of what you can actually, and the standard that you can work towards. So I think working in small consultancies, it's hard to work with those epic brands, those big brands, unless your consultancy business is very well known and respected. I think the other side of things, and one of the realistic facts is that, you know, people climb the agency ladder and they want the next pay rise, they want the next level, they want the next job title. You know, it's more of a either financial or an ego, but more in what your job title is. I'm the chief digital officer of Sapient Nitro, or what, you know, like to have that status, to have that either status and money. So I think they're the main reasons why people work in big agencies, and to work on bigger projects. Obviously, those huge budgets are always beneficial.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, more from a smaller agency perspective, I think you have to be slightly, if not majorly, romantic when you work in a smaller agency or a smaller startup. You have to really, really love it, and you have to, because it's not easy. You know, you've got to hopefully get those couple of clients, you know, that you really enjoy working on, and get more than just the status, the brand name.
Yeah.
And everything else. It's actually something I feel, since I've been doing it anyway, a lot deeper than that. It's actually the feeling that you've made a real difference and change to the output.
Well, and that to me is key, because it lends itself, and that's why I wanted to ask the why, is that, you know, because I think you have to ask yourself why you're in the business anyway, why you do what you do, and you know, if what you do is so that you can somehow or another use it as a badge. Like, I worked on this big project with this big budget, and some of my friends saw it, and you know whatever, you know, then let's be honest, it's quite self-serving. It's not, you know, again, it's almost like buying expensive stuff. You're like, you've got it now, you did it, and you're just going to be kind of going on to whatever the next thing is that will temporarily satisfy you until something else comes. You know, yeah. I think if, and before I sound like I'm just like a boring old prick, like, you know, I've had great experiences working, you know, like, you know, yeah, the boy in me, like when I worked on Ferrari with the Sapient Nitro team back then, I mean, I couldn't be like, I was so excited to tell everyone about, oh, I'm working on Ferrari and blah, blah, blah. But you know, with that, it's just like, okay, we were working on a huge global brand that, as the boy in you, you're like, holy crap. Like, I have pictures of me in their showroom sitting in Ferraris and, you know, things like that. And that was a lot of fun. And what we got to do traveling with just the team, you know, for me, when I really had to sit down and think about why, it's like, with bigger budgets comes bigger problems, comes like bigger expectations, comes bigger when everything goes, you know, goes bottoms up, you know, people, you know, you have to do things that you don't want to do. And so, you know, again, I think boiling back to the, like, why we're in this business, if you're in this business because you want to, I don't know, earn your, you know, your air miles and you know, stay in really dope hotels on your client's budget and stuff like that, then yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, that's what it is. I think if you intrinsically, like, you want to do really great creative that is valued, that you want to make a difference, and it doesn't mean, you know, we all like crave after, like, you know, when Analogy formed, you know, the first thing that we wanted to do, we were like, all right, how do we get a meeting with Adi? How do we get a meeting with, you know, these? And fortunately, my business partner knows every single one of these people. But then we had to, you know, fortunately for us, it aligned with our mission, is that, like, you know, we want to work on the things that we know bring people together in a global sense. And so whether that's music or football or style or things like that, we want these positive cultural elements in the world that unite, and that's why we wanted to work with them. And so, to that point, is like, I don't have to. It doesn't just have to be Adi. It could be a small, you know, whatever. If it aligns with that for us, that's the type of client I want to work with. So, you know, but again, I've been fortunate. I've worked with Rolex. I've worked with Tiffany. I've worked with Ferrari, and you know some, you know, pretty cool brands when you look at them on your CV. But I'll be honest with you, and my wife always liked to point out, she was like, you know, you talk about how excited you are, but like, when you're in those projects, like you seem like just absolutely fried and destroyed. And so it's, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer. I think it really does depend on one's own ambitions. But I will say this: if you're doing work right and you're doing it because, because you need to be doing it, because, you have a greater goal, you're going to make, you just think big agency, big budgets, you're one of 700 people at an agency, and cool. So you're turning out 100 or 200 grand, and you feel like you're on top of the world. I think I began learning that through freelance, if you're consistent and again, you're driving value, you can make more. And, initially, and I'm guilty of it, I think initially, instead of growing, I chose to make a lot of money and, feel excited about it. But then I realized it wasn't actually helping my career, and I had to figure out how to get back on track. But starting my own company, which is hard. And I don't want to suggest that when you do it suddenly overnight, like you're going to make the same amount of money that you make a big agency. But, again, if you can't look at things in the short term, and it's about what we put in, and over time, your agency is going to be successful because you're going to have aligned yourself with people that are going to do the same thing that you guys align together in a big agency did. So I didn't answer that question, but I threw a lot of fluff around it.
So let's just recap. You not only didn't answer the question, you then asked me a question, and then you answered the question. I don't know which question. No, I don't. Anyway,
and not hot.
I think we're definitely reaching the end of that big agency versus small agency startups conversation. What I'm thinking is that I think we should call it time now, and then I think we should do another one. We should reconvene because there are loads of other things that are just firing in my head to catch up about. But I think we covered that main subject matter. So just to finish off, Kurtis, if people want to get in touch with you, or if they want to hit you up online or anything like that, what's the best way to get in touch with you, mate?
I'm simple. All the social media is at Kurtis Powers with a K, Kurtis Powers. And, I don't know, send me an email, curtis@thefaceradio.com. We didn't even talk about the fact that I started a radio station at the same time, which is why I'm talking through this thing. But it's been a pleasure. And in case the answer was vague, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong answer as to whether you want to be at a big agency or a small agency. I think you just have to define why you do it. And if it aligns with that, then do it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So.
I couldn't think of a better way to end this mini segment. We'll definitely do another one soon. Thank you so much, man. I know the time difference and the scheduling and everything, trying to coordinate this was difficult, but that was good. Mainly on my side.
And hopefully I don't just sound like a boring person. I like to have party too.
Yeah, that's the next episode. It's a party episode.
Party episode. We just talk about stuff, fun stuff. Anyway.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much.
And I thank you for doing what you're doing. And we appreciate you.
Thank you, man.